Plankendael Zoo is one of those parks where I still feel it gets too little international attention. This is true even among zoo fans, where when it comes to Belgium, most people tend to look towards Antwerp or of course Pairi Daiza. And both are amazing zoos that I will eventually have to talk about here in detail, but on an area of 40 hectares, Plankendael also has a lot to offer. Over 1,000 animals of various species live here, spread across themed areas that take you through all the continents except Antarctica. And in the following video I would of course like to show you exactly what you can expect on this trip around the world. Whether Plankendael Zoo can really deliver what it promises, and therefore of course whether a visit could be worthwhile for you. Plankendael Zoo is located in Mechelen, almost exactly between Brussels and Antwerp. This extremely good location alone means it's not a poorly visited zoo. Around 927,000 visitors came to Plankendael in 2023, which makes it all the more stranger that I have the impression that hardly anyone has it on their radar. So please let me know in the comments to what extent you already knew about it. If you currently visit the park, you enter through a temporary entrance. On my last visit in 2015, I was still able to get in here. However, the building has since been demolished and is currently making way for a very modern looking entrance area, which will certainly be a real eye-catcher with a 28-meter high bamboo tower. Once I entered the park, I immediately noticed the next change, as the European area had shrunk considerably compared to 2015. It wasn't particularly large back then either, but there were still foxes, badgers and raccoons to be seen. Now it basically just consists of a walk-in aviary, which is home to northern bald ibises among others, and these beautiful large enclosures for guinea pigs and rabbits. Even after this short tour, you might have already guessed that this park is located on the grounds of an estate, after which the zoo is still named. The estate was owned by painter Michiel Coxey in the 16th century, however Plankendael Castle was not built until 1780. And finally in 1956 the Royal Zoological Society of Antwerp bought the grounds, which they originally only used as an outpost. It was used for breeding programs or when there was a lack of space in Antwerp itself. Therefore, public interest was initially very low, but that all changed in 1985 when Plankendael was transformed as part of a reorganization plan into a young, modern, spacious zoo, which now perfectly complements the cramped city zoo in Antwerp as a fully fleshed out sister zoo. But more on that later. There are also flight shows on this meadow behind the estate, which I unfortunately missed. In the end, I was glad that I at least found my way to this vulture aviary, but first we walk past the pelican pond towards the Asian area. Even before you enter the actual theme area, you can meet the Indian rhinos here. These were also originally kept at Antwerp Zoo, where white rhinoceroses still live. However, they have been living here in Plankendael since 1978, and this is the only place in Belgium where you can currently see them. The two Indian rhinos live in two enclosures, here socialized with Vietnamese warty pigs, which gives me a déjà vu, while muntjacs might be a little bit more unusual roommates. Once you then arrive in the actual Asian-themed area, you are first greeted by the Bactrian camels, which unfortunately live in one of the smaller hoofed animal enclosures. And speaking of smaller, there was also a calf here to be seen. Further on, the path leads through a small recreated Asian village, which definitely provides some immersion with a lot of small charming details. Behind it you will find the red panda enclosure and the first glimpse of the large Asian elephant enclosure. But the route takes us around the elephant habitat anyway, so we first turn our attention to an aviary where, among others, ibises and peacocks live. In addition to the view through the net, you can also look into the aviary through small panes of glass. This is followed by the snow leopards enclosure, where the view through the glass panes is even more extensive, making it a wonderful place to observe the ghost cats of the Himalayas. The enclosure is also beautifully designed for the animals, even if it could perhaps do with a little more verticality away from the existing climbing structures. Also, I'm not sure if there is another outdoor enclosure behind the scenes, so that the two cats can be separated properly if necessary. But let's finally get to the elephant enclosure, which you have a wonderful view of from several places. On the other side of the enclosure, children are not only given an incredible climbing experience. From here, at a height of 14 meters, you also have a wonderful view of the entire outdoor area, which covers a total of around 12,000 square meters. This includes the separate bull area, which is a little bit narrow for my liking, but overall it's a very beautiful, large outdoor enclosure which has been inhabited since 2012 by a breeding group of Asian elephants that previously lived in Antwerp Zoo in a much smaller enclosure, which is now used to keep young bulls. In Plankendael, the elephants now also have a large outdoor pool that holds 960 cubic meters of water. And there is also a bathing pool in the house which holds 300 cubic meters of water. In total, the indoor area in the so-called elephant temple covers a total of 2000 square meters, and in addition to the elephant boxes, also offers two free range areas, so that fortunately the bull also has some space to run around when separated. All in all, I really like the elephant enclosure here, as it is well designed for the animals, but also offers really nice opportunities to observe the elephants at length. Of course, the big bull Kanwa is particularly impressive here, but he is actually still a teenager. Fittingly, I already had seen him in 2013, shortly after his arrival at the aforementioned young bull enclosure in Antwerp. Behind the elephant temple, more aviaries and the outdoor enclosure of the Asiatic lion awaits us. Here we also got to see two cubs that were just over a year old. However, I don't quite like the lion enclosure. It's not terrible, but the huge moat, which is also secured with an electric fence, is simply not a usable area for the animals, while the lions apparently have no real access to water. And despite what you may think, even lions might otherwise splash around a bit in the summer. Behind the lion enclosure you come to what is still a fairly new highlight, as the kingdom of the orangutans has only been here since 2022. However, the small tropical hall in which free-flying butterflies can also be seen already existed before that. Back then a few other species lived here, including slow lorises for example. And instead of butterflies, there were some free-ranging and free-flying birds to be seen here. The gibbons, which now live together with the orangutans, were also here back then, but as you can see, their indoor enclosure used to be a monkey island. Now they live together with the orangutans in 3 different large cages. As the word cage has very negative connotations, this may not sound like an improvement at first, but cages can actually offer monkeys better climbing opportunities. After all, they can climb along the sides and on the ceiling. So for the animals, this makes it all the more a 3-dimensionally usable space. And as you can already see, you can look into these cages wonderfully through the glass panes. You can get very close to some of the animals, but of course they are also offered opportunities to retreat. It should also be emphasized that there are regular artificial monsoons in the indoor area. I have to admit though, in my opinion, they are not the most beautiful enclosures for orangutans, but then we are really talking about aesthetics and not about the quality of animal husbandry. When it comes to the outdoor area, however, both are right for me. With their 12 to 14 meter high branch constructions, the orangutan islands offer good climbing opportunities for the animals, and I also think that the view of the islands, with the tropical hall in the background and the general design around them, are very successful. Caro and Moni, the two last orangutans from Stuttgart, can now live here in a very well-designed enclosure. They also share the outdoor area with small clawed otters, and for them this big island area is an absolutely fantastic habitat. And the crested black macaques, which live on a separate island here, have also been given a great enclosure. I also got to see a young monkey in the viewable part of the indoor area, and that wasn't only cute but also very encouraging for a species threatened with extinction. I should also mention that there are still birds living in the tropical hall in two different aviaries, including wrinkled hornbills, which you may remember from the Overhaan-Stierenpark video, but which are not often seen in Europe. Fortunately, they and their flatmates also have an outdoor aviary here. Sadly though, apparently that does not apply for the second aviary. At the end of the Orangutan Kingdom, you can also stop off at a restaurant. Otherwise, the path continues. We pass the European bison enclosure, which historically also lived in Asia. And then we complete our tour of Asia on the other side of the Bactrian camel enclosure. However, we then pass the Przewalski's horses, which are also from Asia. Opposite you will find the Watusi cattle and the entrance to the African area, which we ignore for now and instead go right through the Boomerang Arch into the Oceania area. The first thing we see here is another aviary that extends into the large pond, around which the entire Oceania area is arranged. By the way, this is a white-faced heron that can only be seen in 9 zoos in the whole of Europe. Then the path leads to the Tasmanian devil enclosure, which I didn't get to meet here at first. If you want to observe the largest living Dasyridae, it's best to come here at feeding time or shortly afterwards. Using this tactic, I was able to capture some very nice footage, which made me extremely happy, as this species is only kept in 7 European zoos, in my home country of Germany only in Duisburg. However, I found their 2 enclosures a little small, but there was a building site right in front of the enclosure. Perhaps it was being extended, so let me know if you've been there recently. Due to the building site, I was only able to take a look at the kangaroos from a distance, and I wasn't able to get the best view of the emus either, but the cassowaries made up for it very nicely, and let's be honest, they are much cooler anyway. Or would anyone disagree with me? And I also like their enclosure, which you can see wonderfully from a footbridge. This footbridge leads over the large pond where numerous carp are impatiently waiting to be fed. Behind the cassowaries is a small house with a few terrariums inside. Here you can see common blue-tongued skinks and spiny-tailed monitors, among others. However, the highlight of the Oceania area for many will certainly be the koalas. Sure, they are cute, but they spend most of the time sleeping, and that's what they were doing when I visited as well. The koala house here is quite functional, but not as beautifully designed as many others. And after the koalas, the path leads a little further through the lovely natural landscape out of Oceania again, which means we're off to Africa next. Passing the farm animal enclosure with Watusi cattle, which we have already had a look at, you first come to a square with a ship and a water area that invites children to play. Behind this is Expedition Bonobos, one of the best pygmy chimpanzee enclosures I have ever seen. As you can already see, the bonobos are offered a large, partly densely overgrown island here, on which numerous climbing opportunities invite them to play and romp around. In principle, I am not a fan of moats as boundaries for great apes, as they harbor a certain risk of drowning, but apart from that, the 3000 square meter island is a great habitat for the animals. As a visitor, you can get a wonderful view of the island from this side on an elevated walkway, which also leads you inside the house. There are several indoor enclosures here, covering a total of 422 square meters. As you can see, the indoor enclosures are very three-dimensional, so there are plenty of climbing opportunities for the animals here as well. It was here that I came across the above average sized family group of bonobos. They have been living here since 1992, when they were relocated here from Antwerp. Since then, valuable research work has also been carried out here in Plankendael, and they are not just involved in the conservation breeding program. No, the Antwerp Zoological Society is also the keeper of the stud book, and I think this facility, both indoors and outdoors, definitely does justice to that. It's a great enclosure for both the animals and in terms of the visitor experience. Behind the enclosure you come to a small African village where the interiors of the huts have been designed with great attention to detail and charm. Here you will also find the unfortunately rather small enclosure for banded mongooses, and at the other end an aviary for weaver birds and vulturine guinea fowls. The path then leads us into a walk through lemur enclosure, a very beautifully designed area where both ringtail lemurs and black lemurs live, which also had a youngster. And it was great to observe both species sunbathing on the roof here. From inside the enclosure you can also look into an aviary where the beautiful secretary birds live alongside further vulturine guinea fowls. The next, much larger and beautifully designed aviary, which is home to spoonbills and cattle egrets for example, would normally also be accessible. However, during our visit we were led around it and past the zebra enclosure to the giraffes, where visitors are slowly led up to a viewing platform. From here you have a good overview of the enclosure and are at eye level with the long necks. You can also look into the animal stables through glass panes. The zebras presumably live separately because they can become somewhat aggressive when they have youngsters. However, the giraffes do not live here alone. They are socialized with Dorcas gazelles and Dama gazelles, two species whose populations have benefited greatly from conservation breeding and reintroduction into the wild. The Dama gazelles were once even considered to be extinct in the wild. Beyond the stable building, the path then leads around the large enclosure into a part of the zoo that has been completely redesigned since my last visit. In 2015 there were still rather simply designed enclosures for hoofed animals such as wildebeest, bongo and scimitar oryx. Now the first enclosure here is a large, beautifully designed complex for Barbary macaques, which you can first overview from a lookout tower, before you then have further views of the enclosure from a suitably Mediterranean-style area, where it almost feels like you are on balconies. Here you can also take a look inside the indoor area of the Barbary macaques. Next door is another beautifully designed enclosure which has been home to Somali wild asses since 2022, who live here together with even more Dorcas gazelles. And if you have seen my last video, no, I'm still not over the name Somali wild ass. I probably never will be. The bongos I mentioned earlier now live in a new enclosure behind it, which should be much larger than their old enclosure. In addition, the beautiful antelopes can now be observed in a much nicer environment. Also, there were several calves to be seen here. The two enclosures for spotted hyenas are not quite as modern in comparison, but at the same time they feel far from being out of date. In fact, I know a bunch of more modern enclosures for them that I like way less. The Africa-themed area is rounded off by the cheetahs, whose rather elongated enclosure can be viewed through glass at various points, which means you can watch the cheetahs wonderfully as they roam the enclosure. From here the path leads past Expedition Bonobo and back to the main square, and that means we now have only one last themed area left, America. The first thing we see here are some aviaries, which look a little old-fashioned compared to large parts of the rest of the zoo. But the husbandry conditions for hooded vultures, spectacled owls, gira cuckoos and Mexican military macaques are still perfectly acceptable. The enclosure for bush dogs, which I unfortunately didn't get to see, is much more appealing, as is the walk-in enclosure for the golden-headed lion tamarins and sakis, which I really liked. Thanks to the tall trees, it certainly offers the animals an excellent habitat and normally a great experience for visitors too, but unfortunately both species had retreated to their indoor enclosures. Behind it you come to a large enclosure for elk and bison, which you can watch from between and out of tents. Quite lovely theming, as seen in many places in the park. Thanks to this sign, I definitely felt like I'd been transported to America when I reached the pet area. Although you should have realized by now that North and South America have been combined in this area. So next up is the enclosure for anteaters, but they have also only showed themselves in their indoor enclosure. But evidently I was luckier in 2015. I mean, I found so much great footage in my archive, and so I also saw that back then there were also black-rumped agouti in the enclosure, which might still be around because according to Zootierliste they are still being kept in Plankendael. This is followed by both vicuñas and llamas, which also live together with capybaras in their enclosure. Another shared enclosure is that of the peccaries and coatis, or to be more precise, white-nosed coatis and Chequan peccaries. The enclosure of the Patagonian maras is then again a walk-in enclosure, and from here it would then normally go in a large free flight aviary. Unfortunately, as you can see, construction work was underway here, but fortunately I once again have a lot of footage from 2015, because back then this aviary was one of my absolute highlights. I think it was also the first time I saw flamingos and penguins in the same aviary at the same time. However, there were and still are several other species living here, such as the beautiful Inca terns. So I hope this aviary is now accessible again, because it actually closes off the American area very nicely. And now we are almost through and we could start the conclusion, but I still owe it to you to explain how to get to this vulture aviary. Well, right now you have to leave the park and walk along a path behind the playground, where you then can observe the vultures up close in their really large and beautifully designed aviary. Despite these minor restrictions caused by the current construction work, I had a wonderful visit to Plankendael and enjoyed it even more than I did in 2015. The kingdom of the orangutans is a very welcome new highlight, and the new enclosures for Barbary macaques and the antelopes have made the African area even more harmonious overall. So that's another reason why I can only recommend a visit here. It's a beautifully designed and conceptualized park, which is also very family friendly thanks to numerous play facilities spread throughout the park, even if it's not the cheapest overall, and I would especially recommend to bring your own food. In spring and summer, numerous storks also nest here, which rounds off the wonderful natural ambience wonderfully. In addition to them, the sky is also filled by numerous planes that land in Brussels. However, I didn't find them loud or disturbing, and I don't think they affect the animals much. Overall, the animal husbandry here is at a very, very good level. There are only a few exceptions where I have a few complaints, and the animal population has a lot to offer too, with some classic zoo highlights as well as certain rarities. One of the few things that could really complement the animal collection here would be some kind of large bear, or of course perhaps more reptiles or an aquarium, but I don't think that's really necessary in such a large landscape zoo. Both can also be found at Antwerp Zoo, and I think that shows quite well how good the two facilities complement each other. The fact that I consider Antwerp Zoo to be one of the best city zoos also has to do with the fact that many of the animals, especially the elephant breeding group, have been moved to much larger enclosures here. I mean, all 4 species of great apes used to live in Antwerp, and thank goodness they are now spread over 2 zoos. So yeah, if you really want to take a little zoo tour, you could combine Antwerp Zoo and Planckendael Zoo and get an overall picture of the 2 related facilities. Let me know in the comments what your impressions of Plankendael are, whether through this video or because you've been there yourself. And as I said, please let me know if you had the zoo on your radar before. If you liked the video, I would of course appreciate a thumbs up. If you want to see many more zoo videos, click on the subscribe button and activate the bell. You know, all that good YouTube stuff. And I promise you, when we reach 5,000 subscribers, I will have something very special for you. Thank you so much, take care, have a great day, and as we say in Germany, auf Wiedersehen, yours truly, Martin.